5, beginning with verse 1. So it was, as the multitude pressed about him to hear the word of God, that he stood by the lake of Gennesaret, and saw 2 boats standing by the lake, but the fishermen had gone from them and were washing their nets. Then he got into one of the boats, which was Simon, and asked him to put out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the multitudes from the boat. When he had stopped speaking, he said to Simon, "Launch out into the deep, and let down your nets for a catch." But Simon answered and said to him, "Master, we have toiled all night and caught nothing. Nevertheless, at your word, I will let down the net." And when they had done this, they caught a great number of fish, and their net was breaking. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both the boats, so that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish which they had taken. And so also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will catch men." So when they had brought their boats to land, they forsook all and followed him. And may God add his blessing to the reading of his word today. Whenever a hurricane threatens the eastern coast of our country, the East Coast newspapers, radio, and TV stations always issue what is called a shallow water warning. This warning tells all the swimmers that they are to stay in shallow water during that day. And included in this warning is the warning that if you get out of the shallow water and into the deep, the lifeguards are going to whistle at you. Not because you look good, but because they want you to get back in the shallow water. And then the warning says if you do not obey the lifeguard's whistle, then security will be called and see if they can get you back in shallow water. Now, the reason for this warning is not to spoil the swimmer's day. It's not to take away from their fun or enjoyment. It's to save their life. Because when a hurricane is threatening the coast, these strong currents take people out into the deep without them even realizing it or able to resist it, and many lives have been drowned and lost because of this. So this is the purpose of a shallow water warning. Well, in the text we just read, we have an event in the life of Jesus that took place in the water. Now, this event started out in the shallow water. As Jesus got into one of Peter's fishing boats to better enable him to speak to that large crowd, verse 3 tells us that Jesus asked Peter to put out a little from the land. A little from the land. Obviously, that was the shallow part of the lake. But notice what Jesus said to Peter in verse 4. Launch out into the deep. Peter, you've been in the shallow water long enough. It's time for you to move out to the deep. Peter, it's time for you to leave the shallow water and go out into the deep. And as Peter left the shallow for the deep, we're going to see 4 signs or results of being in deep water with Jesus Christ. And as we go through this message, look at your relationship with Christ and see if you are in deep water with him or if you're still back in the shallow water with the rest of the crowd. First of all, deep water is foreboding. Foreboding. Notice Peter's reluctance in verse 5. He said to Jesus, "Master, we have toiled all night and caught nothing." Peter and his men, after working all night without a wink of sleep, they are They are sad, they are mad, and they are bad. They are aggravated, frustrated, they're weary, they're worn out, they're exhausted. They don't have a smiley face among the bunch. Okay? These guys, their backs are aching, their stomachs are empty, their pocketbooks are empty, their heads are pounding, their eyes are heavy. All these guys want to do is go home and flop in the bed. And here's Jesus, and he says, no, you go back out to where you've been all night. And you continue to do what you've been doing all night without any success, of course. And for Peter and his men to do this took a lot of extra work, a lot of more toil and labor. And back then, any time they would go out into the deep, there was always a high risk of danger that they wouldn't come back. So this was foreboding for Peter and his men. Secondly, this was just foolish. Foolish. Now, Peter was a professional commercial fisherman. He didn't fish for a hobby, to relax, or to rest, or get away. No, Peter fished to feed his family, to clothe his family, and to house his family. And Peter knew this lake like the back of his hand. He spent more time on water than he did on land. And Peter knew, first of all, this was the wrong time. You see, back in that day and time, at this particular place, they caught their fish at night. They didn't catch fish in the day. That's why they'd been fishing all night. That was their time to fish. And then second of all, the place was wrong. What had they caught the night before? What I used to catch when I went fishing. Absolutely nothing. You see, the place was wrong, the timing was wrong. And then on top of that, here you've got this landlubber, this carpenter, telling a professional fisherman how and where to fish. This made no sense to Peter and his crew. I can just see the looks on their faces when Jesus said this. They're just shaking their heads and they're rolling their eyes. This makes no sense at all. It's ridiculous, it's foolish, it's silly, it's stupid, it's a waste of our time. And yet, Peter, in spite of these two drawbacks, he obeys Jesus, launches out into the deep, lets down his nets, and this brings us to the third thing you find in the deep, the focus. The focus. Verses 6 and 7 tells us that Peter and his crew caught so many fish that the boats began to sink. Now, let's put ourselves in Peter's fishing boots for a moment. We just caught the biggest catch we've ever caught in our life. We've caught so much, our boats are sinking. We're about to lose it all. Now, where are we going? We're going to those boats, just as fast as our little legs will take us. But look in verse 8. Where did Peter go? When Peter saw the sinking boats and fish, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man." Peter didn't go to his boats and to his fish. He went to his Jesus. Why? Because his focus has changed. His focus is now on Jesus and not those boats and not those fish. His focus is on his place before Jesus at his knees. His focus is on his plight before Jesus. I am a sinful man. Peter's number one focus and priority in his life has changed from his profession and his possessions. It's changed from what he did for a living and what he had in his pocketbook. His focus has changed to that carpenter from Nazareth. That's what you find out in the deep. You find real focus on Jesus. And then, to find the fourth result of being in the deep, we go down to verse 11. And it is to forsake. Now, this catch was the largest catch these men had ever hauled in. In those boats and in those fish was the biggest paycheck Peter and his crew had ever got. That catch was finding a gold mine, striking it rich, hitting the jackpot, winning the lottery. Peter, his wives, and their kids were now set. Okay? Look in verse 11. When they had brought their boats to land, they forsook all and followed him. They what? They didn't go to the bank? They didn't go to the market? They didn't go to the mall? No. They forsook all and followed him. They forsook all those fish, all those boats, all that money, all those possessions. They gave it all up. They sacrificed it all to follow Jesus Christ. Okay. Now, let's check the depth of our relationship with Jesus Christ. Okay? Got 4 questions for you. These 4 points. Number 1, foreboding. Listen closely. Have you ever, or are you currently, doing anything foreboding for Jesus Christ? Have you ever, or are you currently doing anything that's hard and difficult and demanding and tiring and taxing and testing for Jesus Christ? Have you? Are you? If you have and if you are, you're out in the deep where Jesus is at. But if you haven't and you're not, you're still back at the beach, a little out from the land. Foolish. Have you ever, or are you currently doing anything for Jesus that in the eyes of people or yourself is just downright foolish? Doesn't make any sense at all. Doesn't add up, doesn't compute. Seems silly and stupid, impractical, unrealistic. Have you ever done anything, or are you currently doing anything like that for him? If you are, you're out in the deep where he's at. If you're not, you're still back on the beach, playing with the sand, building sandcastles. And then there's the focus. Listen closely. Is Jesus Christ the number 1 focus of your entire life? Is Jesus Christ the number 1 priority of your entire life? Is Jesus Christ the number 1 person and relationship in your entire life? Is Jesus Christ the love of your life? If he is, you're out in the deep with him. If not, you're still back in the shallow on the beach collecting seashells and been forsake. Have you ever given up anything to follow him? Now, there's a difference between giving and giving up. There's a difference between giving and sacrificing. We're talking about sacrificing. Have you ever sacrificed anything to follow him? Have you ever left and given up anything, or maybe even anyone, to follow him. If you have, or if you are, you're out in the deep water where he's at. But if you haven't, and if you're not, you're back in the kiddie pool with the rest of the kids. You see, my friend, it's one of the two. You're either out a little from the land or you're out a lot from the land. Now, we all know where we should be, don't we? We all know where we need to be. Jesus Christ did not die on that cross for us to spend our life in shallow water. Jesus Christ did not die on that cross for us to stay on the beach in the kiddie pool, playing in the sand and collecting seashells. Jesus Christ died on that cross so we could swim with him. He died on that cross so that we could live for him and serve him and worship him in the deep. In the deep. And remember, where did they catch the fish? In the deep. In the deep. When it comes to hurricanes, get in the shallow water. Stay there. But when it comes to living for Jesus Christ, our place is not the shallow water. Our place is in the deep water. In the deep. You know where you're at. He knows where you're at. And you know where you should be. And he knows where you should be. God help us all individually, and God help us all collectively as a church to get where we belong. Out from the land. In the deep, where our Savior's at.